Hello, my friends. It's Friday once again, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. But first, a small announcement. I published a new book of short stories this week called Dark Facets, and tonight's story is included in my new book. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and invite you into the night with a story I call Vampire First. The heavy stone lid of the tomb, anchored by centuries of dust and moisture which sealed it like mortar, slowly scraped ever closer to the far edge. Positioning his bar once again, Francesco heaved with all the strength his small, tired body could muster. At 5 foot and 6 inches, his slender frame was not made for heavy lifting, but rather the fine, detailed work he was used to as an anthropologist. But this time was different. He had to do the heavy work himself. For many years, he combed the scrolls and research of others looking for the spear of destiny, the very instrument which sealed Jesus' fate on the cross, bringing the prophecies of the Old Testament to bear. His search led him first to the tomb of the legionnaire who actually thrust the spear into Jesus' side, where he found only dust. Then, following a story of one who had found the tomb first, he came to yet another tomb where this man was now dust. And so, it went for many years, following a trail of crumbs to this, the latest tomb in a chain of many. How he knew he didn't know, but he was sure that this tomb was the one which would reveal his destiny, and he was not about to share it with anyone lest they take it from him. So, moving quietly and alone, he took a sabbatical from university life to pursue this latest lead. His travels began in South America, where he stayed for several weeks before making his way across to Europe. Slowly, he moved from place to place, country to country, to hide his real intentions. Then, in the dead of night, he boarded a boat in Greece and made his way to the mountains of Romania. Like many other scholars, he knew the legends and fables of darkest Europe were based in the facts of ancient warrior conquests. Since time unknown, men searched for the Holy Grail and other artifacts relating to Jesus and the crucifixion. It was the ability to pick the truths from the fables which resulted in discovery. Now, he had found what he was sure to be the resting place of the last known man to have held the spear of destiny. He could feel it within, and his heart pounded as the heavy lid of the coffin slid closer to the edge. Then suddenly, as if having a mind of its own, the coffin lid raised up and began to slide away after passing the balance point. It fell with a heavy crash which resounded in the tomb, but Francesco did not notice. His eyes were fixed on the remains before him. Unlike the others he had found, this one was not merely dust or a few bone fragments. This one was different. The body lying in the tomb was mummified, and though the cloth and leather which had covered it in the past were now gone, it still bore metal plates of armor at the chest, shoulders, gauntlets, and shins. The arms were positioned so the corpse held the sword laying on its chest as if in prayer with the blade pointing towards his feet. Upon the head was a crown of gold and silver with one ruby cast in the center of the forehead. This was a king of ancient times. Carefully, Francesco searched around and under the body, but found nothing. So he began to slowly remove the armor plates until finally the only thing left was the sword. As he pulled it to one side, he saw a gaping hole in the chest and understood how this king had died. Gently, he worked the hilt of the sword from the hands, leaving them to rest on the chest. In the glint of the lantern light, he could see there was writing on the sword. As he wiped the sword with the palm of his hand to remove the dust and reveal the text, he was surprised to find the blade was still razor sharp. A deep gash erupted on his palm, making him withdraw in pain. He dropped the sword back onto the body and grasped his hand, watching as a few drops of his blood fell to the chest and entered the gaping wound there. Before his eyes, the body began to reconstitute, and the hole in the chest closed upon itself. Staring in disbelief, he could only watch as flesh covered the bones under the parchment of skin, filling out the form of a powerful man, while his hand continued to bleed. Then suddenly, the corpse reached up and grasped his arm, pulling the wounded hand toward its face. Francesco screamed as scaly lips sucked at his injured hand and frantically tried to pull himself free. As if a projector was playing before his eyes, images began to appear to him, and he knew he was seeing the history of this forgotten king. It was he who struck the spear into Jesus. He who was seen leaving each tomb where he slept in death, waiting for the next who would awaken him after assuming their identity. He who had been many a king and tyrant through the Dark Ages, wreaking havoc upon the world and drinking the blood of men. He was the first vampire. Many legends abound to explain the origins of the vampire. As it has always been, men change the story to suit them, taking away parts they either do not believe or cannot tolerate, and adding aspects they desire. A good example of this is the modern-day King James Holy Bible. While technically accurate in its contents of the original scrolls, only those with a penchant for research or biblical scholars are aware that many scrolls were left out, because they did not please the court which assembled the Bible. Among the many scrolls not included, there is one which clearly accounts the crucifixion of Jesus at Golgotha, and his last words spoken to a man before he died. As his blood ran down the spear of destiny to the hands of the soldier, Jesus looked at him and said, "As you are, so shall you remain until my return." Those standing nearby did not hear the words, as they thought Jesus was already dead, and they did not seem to notice the jolt the soldier received as Jesus' blood stained his hands. But the soldier heard, and though he was a disbeliever until that moment, he knew what he had done. When Mary Magdalene found Jesus' tomb unguarded and empty, she sought the disciples to report what she found. After seeing, as she had, that Jesus was not in his tomb, they returned home, leaving her to weep over Jesus' shroud, which had been left behind. The Bible tells us that Mary spoke with 2 angels, and then with Jesus himself as he returned to the tomb before ascending to heaven. Many have asked where Jesus went from the time he rose in the tomb until returning to speak with Mary. There was a scroll which fills in this bit of missing history. Jesus' tomb was guarded by a soldier, the same soldier, in fact, who thrust the spear into his side. The touch of Jesus' blood made him believe, and in his remorse, he sought to protect Jesus' body because he heard the people mocking Jesus when he said he would return. His hope was that Jesus would let him repent of his act upon his return and forgive him. It was not to be. The shock he felt at the touch of Jesus' blood was the invasion of a demon using the blood as an ethereal portal in which to occupy him. Knowing this, Jesus trapped the demon within the soldier with his words, denying his ability to move among men, causing evil. The very act of piercing his side was predestined, and thus not an evil act. But the demon saw only a chance to exploit an innocent. The soldier, in his remorse, also did not understand, and thus felt only the remorse of his actions. Upon leaving the tomb, Jesus spoke with the soldier to tell him he was not damned, but rather an agent of God against the demon. But the soldier understood not. In his overwhelming grief that forgiveness was denied, and unable to understand there was nothing to forgive, he fled into the night. In time, the demon overpowered the soldier and wrought his vengeance on the earth. Doomed to die 1,000 deaths at the hands of men and unable to return to hell, the demon passed the eons waiting for Jesus' return and the commencement of Armageddon, when he would be free once more. Warm and salty, the heady taste of blood permeated his senses as he drank from the man. He could again feel the cells of his body regenerating, reforming, and becoming as they once were. Waves of agony pierced every fiber of his being, but he ignored them, knowing it would pass soon as he traveled with his mind into the prey. Images of cities and strange carriages which moved without horses assaulted his senses. Crowds of people milling about in confusion as they scurried about their pointless lives among glass castles which towered skyward. Much had changed since he last walked the earth, and he was eager to explore it. For many centuries he had slumbered since his last death at the hands of the great vampire hunter. Now he is awake once again, and he is hungry. Francesco screamed as he felt the beast bite more deeply into his wrist, draining the lifeblood from his body. As his vision began to dim, he looked into the face of the beast and saw himself looking back. The demon rose from the crypt and stripped the clothing from his victim. After seeing what the world had become, he knew his armor and clothing of old would not do. He threw the scholar's lifeless body into the crypt and donned the clothing. He would have to blend into the modern age. He would not, however, leave the sword behind. Picking it up, the weight felt good in his hands, and he swung it in a low arc, bringing it up vertically before his eyes. Unlike most broadswords, this one was particularly wide and thick near the hilt. Grasping the pommel in one hand and the guard in the other, he released the hidden lock and separated them, freeing the spear of destiny from its hiding place. He sniffed at the blade, savoring the smell of the death strike which finished his true enemy. The time was drawing near for the ultimate final battle. Reassembling the sword, he slid it into the scabbard and strapped it to his back. Stepping from the tomb, he breathed heavily of the clean night air and cast his gaze toward the lights of a city on the horizon. It was time once again to raise his legions. It was time to hunt. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for this week, but I'll be back again next Friday with another story. Just for you. Until then, sleep well.